Okay, so I'm gonna explain how this is gonna go, but basically we have two groups in the class. One group, your pattern's just squares, which is fine. It's perfect. And the other group, your pattern has those right triangles. So how you approach getting started is a little different. What I want to know in the chat, if you have right triangles in your pattern like mine, let me show you mine. So I have a few of those little right triangles that are gonna make a square. If you have right triangles in your pattern in the chat, say yes. And don't worry guys, I'm gonna go over this and it's probably gonna be very confusing. We're gonna go over it again. Some people will be ready to start sewing today. Some people may not, that's okay. We're gonna go slow, step by step, bird by bird. Again, trust, you've already done this on a smaller scale. Because you made that little pillow, you've already done it. You combined two squares together and then you slowly made your little pillow. It's the same concept. So here are those squares that we first started off with when we made our pillow. And what you did is you sewed just that one side and it attached. This concept of sewing one side, we're going to continue that just in a row. And I'll show you what I mean in just a second. The only difference from the pillow and what we did or what we're going to do now is you're not going to make a pillow basically. When we started sewing our pillow, like our squares were small, you know, they were kind of tiny. They're about an inch by inch. But even then, even with those being small pieces of fabric, our pillow came out even smaller. It was almost half the size. And it's really because of sewing. And that's why you guys have that 2.5 by 2.5. It's you're gonna sew in, you know, you don't want to sew really, really close to the edge because that's when that like fraying will rip your stitches out. And so what you want to do, so like if you have the 2.5 by 2.5 inch square, it's perfect. It's gonna get smaller. So if you're looking at all your squares, you're like, man, this thing's gonna be big. It's gonna get smaller once we start sewing it. So trust in that. But what we're gonna do is we're just gonna look at our first row. So for those of you that have triangles, my first row does have triangles. Here's the one I'm working with you guys together. So I have a few areas with triangles and I have just one square that doesn't have a triangle. But I wanted to make just a quick sketch that kind of matches our other classmates that have just squares. So if you haven't labeled, label your rows. And I highly suggest this. I would also fold your sketch so you only see that top row. So you only see it. Now, again, I'm just going to show you what we're going to do. You don't need to get started yet. I'm just going to show you. Because you've already done this. Again, you've already done it. You did it with your pillow. Just now we're doing it on a larger scale, you know, with our larger squares. So here's my other sketch. This sketch is just squares. So those are for my students that just have square designs. And I have orange, my two plaid, yellow, and then my little pinky color. So that's this right here. Orange, my two plaid, yellow, and my pink. So my row is going to look like this. There you go, a little bit easier. So I have my orange, two plaid next to each other, then my yellow, and then my pink. It doesn't matter which way you start, but once you, like for instance, let's say you started here on the right and you attach those two. After that, then it does matter, right? I can't attach my yellow to my orange. because those don't meet on my pattern. I have to attach it to my plaid. I, for some reason, have been starting from right to left. I don't know why. I'm gonna start today from left to right. That feels, or it's supposed to be more normal. But what we're doing is we're just doing that same concept. We had, just like the pillow, we had those two squares that were next to each other. We sewed them together from our pretty side to pretty side, and they attached. What's different is instead of just having the two, we're moving on to attaching a third. This is what I mean. So my orange and my plaid, they're gonna attach. The first thing you have to think about, do you have a pretty side and an ugly side? My orange, it's the same on both sides. There's no pattern. My plaid, there is. There's the plaid and then there's the blank. So it does have a pretty side. And really it's just the plaid that does. The yellow and the pink, same thing. They're identical, so it doesn't matter. So I'm attaching my orange to my plaid. And they're gonna be attached right here. With the first two, unless you have a specific design or pattern and you want it to look a certain way, where you sew doesn't really matter. It's not until you get to the third, because I don't want my next plaid to sew on this side of the orange, because that's not how the pattern goes. It's orange, plaid, plaid. So I need it to be sewn to the plaid, right? Back in the day in kindergarten when we had to learn about patterns. So I always go step by step. Just go 2 squares at a time and use your sketch. This is really going to help you remember and see, okay, it needs to attach right there. So pretty side and this side doesn't really matter, right? But pretty side needs to touch and be inside. And what I care about is that, oops, pretty side. And I needed to attach right there. So what I did is I drew myself a little line. I drew a little line just to remind myself, 1, don't sew too close to the edge. And then 2, I need to sew on this side. So when it opens, it follows this pattern. Just like how we did when we did our pillow. When it opens, it's attached. You know you're attaching these two, and you gotta attach them together. The first two, again, unless you care which way, you know, that patterned one goes, it doesn't really matter. I could even sew like on this side, I could sew on this side, because I just need to make sure that when I open it, one part of the orange is attached to one part of my plaid. Then on my third, when I attach the plaid to a plaid, then I need to make sure, okay, the plaid has to be sewn to the plaid, not the orange. Let me show you. So here, let's say I do my running stitch twice, okay? And we're gonna do it together. I'm just showing you first, and then we're gonna do it together. I do my running stitch twice, open it up, now it's attached. My third one, this is kind of where, I don't wanna say you get lost, but this is where you have to really make sure you're paying attention. I need my plaid to touch my plaid, right? At that joint, it needs to be sewn together. Pretty side to pretty side, they gotta hug, they gotta touch. So I'm gonna close this kind of like a book. And I need to make sure to sew here. What would happen if I sewed over here? It would look like a book, yeah. So this would become, like if this was attached, this would become like a little page. It wouldn't go down the row, basically. So that's where it starts to get a little tricky. Basically, you're doing what we learned in our pillow, but you keep adding on, sewing on the right, adding on, sewing on the right, adding on. You're always gonna sew on the right if you're going this way. I'm gonna go this way throughout our project, just so I don't confuse you even though I've been doing it backwards, doing my other one. Once I sew this, now this is combined. And then it comes back down to looking at my map. Okay, so now I got to combine this plaid to this yellow. This is a pretty side. This one doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter which way I put this fabric. But again, I'm going to fold it. Same thing. Sew on the right. Because when this opens, it's going to continue on. Right? Now, for those of you that have your triangles, this is not for those of you that are doing squares. You guys, that's what we just talked about. And we'll do it again together. I'm just kind of giving you an overview so that way you kind of know what I'm talking about when we get started. For those of you that are doing triangles, same thing. Just look at that first row. Don't be distracted by the rest of your sketch. And some of you may not need to fold this like this. It's up to you. Whatever helps you stay not lost. Whatever helps you have a clear mind. So my first ones, I need my red and yellow, then it's just an orange square, and then the next two. It really depends on how you work, which way you like things to go, or if you like to get tedious things out of the way before you start kind of that thing. These squares, you know, the 3" by 3", you have to cut them in half, right? You're cutting a diagonal. That's kind of what I have right here. So what's going to happen is my first square is red, yellow. Make sure you have the diagonals going the right way. This one, you have to pay attention. And you really just have to look at your sketch. Okay, red's at the top, going this way. My next one, red's at the top, going this way. Then it's yellow, then my orange, then the next one. And it keeps going down. So this, let me get these out of the way. This is one square. This is my next square. And then it continues on. You guys have to decide, those of you that are doing the diagonals, what I like to do is I like to get these out of the way because you have to attach them. They were separate, right? They're separate pieces. But now you need to make them back into one piece, one square. So what I tend to do is I'll get all of these attached as squares. Then you kind of do what the rest of the class is going to do, where you just go square by square and start attaching. So for instance, I would get these two. Again, the yellow has no pattern. My red does, so that one does matter. And where I'm attaching it is along that straight edge. My advice, and don't worry, this, I'll make a video and I'll also have it written in case that's easier. My advice is don't worry about this edge, the diagonal edge, because no one's going to see it. It doesn't really matter. Like, here's my example that I've already started. No one sees the edge that meets. You kind of just want them to be along the right line. So when I start sewing them, I never really care about lining these up. I care about lining the other lines. The right edge, left edge. Just kind of getting those parts as straight as possible, as best as possible. And then if you have a clip, if you have a bobby pin, whichever is easiest. I find this helps me if I have something else holding it besides my fingers, because you're going to start stitching along your diagonal. Double stitch. Remember, do it twice, running stitch. And I don't want the fabric to move because it's already, going to be a little bit more challenging. So for instance, pattern side, you want it on the inside, pretty side on the inside. I line up the edges here on the outside as best I can. I don't care that there's a little bit more blue showing. That doesn't matter. No one's going to see it. And what I do is I'll draw myself a little line. Now, if you know you had trouble with your pillow about sewing too close to the edge, I would suggest giving yourself a guiding line. Again, it's just basically not exactly a whole entire pencil width, but roughly that amount. Okay. And then you're just going to do the running stitch twice. And again, we're going to do this together. I'm just giving you kind of like what's going to happen, and then we'll get started. So my advice is get those diagonals attached again. Then kind of like what we're doing with the rest of the class, like our classmates that just have squares, then start attaching your square. Like worry about that after the diagonals are done. And I'll show you how to get those to lay flat, because that kind of gets a little tricky. Because what happens when you sew the diagonal, it wants to get a little like roundy. And so I'll show you how to sew the square to the square when you get those ready.